How do you know what your mother died of or your grandmother died of? It's probably the treatment they were given. Even Fauci admits that intubation was the wrong call. And then you're talking about how they gave this drug cocktail mix that stopped your breathing. And so that's probably, and then on top of it, they gave people remdesivir, which is extremely toxic. So this is Bill Gates at the beginning of the pandemic, of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is in 2020. And he's being asked about all the adverse events that were associated with the vaccine. And let's listen to his answer.
The side effects for the Moderna vaccine sound concerning. We looked. After the second dose, at least 80% of participants experienced a systemic side effect, ranging from severe chills to fevers. So, are these vaccines safe?
Well, the FDA, not being pressured, will look hard at that. The FDA is the gold standard of regulators, and their current guidance on this, if they stick with that, is very, very appropriate. And you know, the side effects were not super severe. That is, it didn't cause permanent health problems for the things there. Moderna did have to go with a fairly high dose. And so, to get the antibodies, some of the other vaccines are able to go with lower doses to get responses that are pretty high, including the J&J and the Pfizer. And so there's a lot of characteristics of these vaccines. It's great that we have multiple of them that are going out there. And yes, I think
you know the data better than I do. But the data showed that everybody with a high dose had a side effect.
Yeah, but some of that is not dramatic, where it's just super painful. But yes, we need to make sure there's not severe side effects. The FDA, I think, will do a good job of that, despite the pressure.
So that's what Bill Gates looks like when he's got a $500 million investment in a product.
That was really clear, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I didn't know what he was talking about half the time.
I didn't know what he was talking about, and but he used a lot of hand gestures, and he had to swallow a lot. So after he cashed in his stock in Pfizer, and he made $550 million, $500 million on one product, he said this. This is what he said after he cashed in his stock.
It wasn't until early February, when I was in a meeting, that experts at the foundation said, there's no way, there's been too much travel without diagnosis for us to contain this. And then,
so what he's blaming the spread of COVID on is not that the vaccine didn't stop transmission. He's trying to blame it on there was too much travel already, and people. So that's what. So that's his first lie. But now watch his admission. Watch this.
At that point, we didn't really understand the fatality rate. We didn't understand that it's a fairly low fatality rate, and that it's a disease mainly of the elderly, kind of like flu is, although a bit different than.
So he just admitted that the COVID-19 virus had a very low fatality rate of an infection. Fatality was very low. It wasn't this crazy thing we should be scared of. It was very low, and it affected mostly the elderly, kind of like the flu. So that was after he cashed in his stock and made $550 million. So people are still taking a vaccine till this day. Boosters, people are still doing it. It's still available for even the guy, Bill Gates, who's a big liar about vaccines, is admitting that, it has a very low fatality rate, and it mostly just affects the elderly like the flu. And so I guess my point is, I don't know what my point is exactly, but does that outrage you to see that?
Totally. I mean, I think it's good to see that Bill Gates' thinking has progressed, hasn't it? And the fact that he sold some stock in between times, of course, is probably a total irrelevance. We can't possibly say there's a causal relationship there. But no, I mean, what he was saying before, I think we already knew, even in 2020, there was a lot of adverse reactions, and the Moderna particularly. I mean, Joe Freeman's reanalysis showed that Moderna had more serious adverse reactions than the Pfizer. that the Pfizer did, because it was a larger dose. Why they went for such a large dose, I have no idea. But what a shrewd businessman Bill Gates is. He bought at the right time. He sold at the right time.
Yeah.
I mean, our former Prime Minister, Richie Sunak, his trust fund invested in Moderna in 2013, it was. Again, very good anticipation. Must be a really shrewd businessman to anticipate all that time ahead. You got to really admire these guys for their financial acumen and brilliance.
So I just find it shocking. I had on another person on my show yesterday, a radio show host, and he repeats how deadly COVID was. 3,000 people a day were dying, and
you still get this. I mean, even I think the average age of death in the UK was 83. But you know what I've done, Jimmy? I've made a point over the past few years of all people I know that work in care homes. And during that time, during the pandemic time, 2020, 2021, what was happening is people in care homes were getting COVID. And they were getting telephone appointments with doctors because the doctors weren't going to see them face to face in case they got this dread lurgy. They were getting telephone appointments with doctors. And very often, when they were diagnosed with COVID, they were put on end-of-life drugs. And at that time, we were giving a combination of midazolam, which is a benzodiazepine, and morphine, which is an opiate. And, my first-year student nurses should know you don't mix those two. And a lot of people
why
were dying.
Don't you mix those?
Because they potentiate each other. They have potentiation effects. It's like if you take alcohol and barbiturates, you get a double whammy. It's called a potentiation effect. And that potentiation effect particularly causes respiratory depression.
So you're breathing. It'll stop your breathing.
Yeah.
So most of I've talked about this, that, when someone says, well, my grandmother died of COVID, and that's why I'm getting my booster. I'm like, well, how do you know what your mother died of or your grandmother died of? It's probably the treatment they were given. Even Fauci admits that intubation was the wrong call. And then you're talking about how they gave this drug cocktail mix that stopped your breathing. And so that's probably, and then on top of it, they gave people remdesivir, which is extremely toxic. So I always tell people, how do you know it wasn't the treatment that killed your grandmother? Because that's probably what did it, because COVID has a very low fatality rate. So,
not only did they give them those things that were harmful, they didn't give them ivermectin, they didn't give them vitamin D, they didn't give them high doses of vitamin C, all things that potentially could have been massively beneficial. The intubation thing, we genuinely didn't know that at the beginning, but that was learned pretty quickly. But mixing opiates and benzodiazepines, that's kind of pretty basic stuff, really. Why that was done, why that persisted for so long. And what proportion of people died as a result of that would have made a good recovery? I mean, some patients weren't even given oxygen, when they could have recovered with simple oxygen like that. And in our country, I think we keep records for about 7 years. So, pretty soon these records are going to start being destroyed. And we may never know, because there's no official appetite for finding out what proportion of people in care homes died of COVID infection versus the proportion that died of iatrogenesis, that were actually killed as a result of medical treatments, or killed as a result of medical treatments they didn't get. I don't think we're ever going to know that, but, we're free to guess. Is it 50%? Is it more than 50% would have survived? Quite probably. And so we owe this to these. These are people that have died. These are people that have died. The relatives, in many cases, don't have the proper closure. These people have a right to know this, and it's just the research is simply not being done.
October 19th, we'll be in Irvine, California. We'll be in Australia. Then we'll be in Burbank, California, the day after Thanksgiving. And then Pottstown, Pennsylvania, December 6th. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.